So for today's lecture, we're going to be looking at the changing economy of the early 1800s, of the early 19th century. We're going to look at how the economy went from being small farmers to industrializing, the influence of the Industrial Revolution as corporations grew, the economy changed drastically, and this has long-lasting effects. This is one of the more important moments in human history, really, is the Industrial Revolution, the growth of machines, the growth of human capability, and the huge change that has on the United States. Life for many people in the United States was built on subsistence farming. In the areas, especially the areas that they move west, people move west to make their life on a ranch, to make farms. These were self-sufficient farmers. People grew their own food, hunted, made their own clothing, built their own houses, educated their own children. It was poor, but it was stable. They knew what kind of life, they knew their day in, day out life. People had basically a very simple life. Most people had never traveled more than 20 miles away from where they were born. You have to imagine how hard it is to get anywhere on horseback or on a carriage. Life is spent at home with the family. Those are the people you work with, the people you live with. You often married your neighbors. Marriage was often had to do with sharing property, sharing goods, more than love, like our modern idea of love. So it's more of a kind of a contractual thing. And then most of your life was spent working. Um, Rather than going to school, other things like that, you spent working as a farmer to kind of sustain your life. This has often had small workshops, local areas where these kind of things were crafted by hand, one piece at a time. You can see a recreation of this in this picture. There's a small workshop that had a few artisans working to shape, wagon wheels, different tools, saws, stuff like that. Like I said, it's very slow, tedious work. Things are shaped, woodwork by hand. These usually like serve the local community. So these subsistence farmers might buy some stuff from their local artisans, but nothing was mass produced at this point. There were massive changes taking place. The way we see the subsistence farmers living had been the way people had lived for thousands of years, really. But what happens is the world is beginning to industrialize. The world is beginning to connect in ways that it hadn't. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain, but markets expanded in the early 1800s. What happens is local producers begin to connect to a broader economy. Rather than having that small little area, you can connect to other people through transportation methods. We'll talk about other ways. And farmers and merchants began to mass produce items. You're not just growing stuff for yourself, you're starting to growing stuff to as part of the economy to sell. So capitalism is growing. The idea of producing goods, producing output. So the idea of capitalism is basically you have the freedom to produce things and put it in a free market where other people can buy it and sell you things. So the idea behind this is the idea of maximizing profits. It's no longer growing stuff, building stuff just to survive. You're trying to maximize your profit. To maximize profit, you're trying to maximize your output. You're trying to create more, get more out there. And also you're trying to hire as many employees as possible. You need more people to produce more output, to produce more profit. And the result of a lot of this is the output booms. Things that your traditional crops become huge, huge exports, huge industries. So if you look at in 1859, 173 million bushels of wheat are produced in the United States. And this is not just for subsistence farmers, this is sold all over the country for people's breads, other things like that. In the 1850s, cotton made up to 40% of US exports. So that's a huge crop being traded worldwide. So this growth in industry leads to what's known as the birth of manufacturing. The small workshops give way to corporations and factories, places that hire a lot of people, produce mass goods. So what's happening, there's more goods available. The economy is really starting to grow as a result of industrialization. Growth of these factories and corporations, tend to be located in large cities. They need a lot of labor. So they need resources, other things which are located in cities. So what this actually does as well, it draws people to the cities. They want to work in the factories. They want to have this stable lifestyle where they can go to work and produce goods. So cities tend to grow, urbanization occurs. These aspects of this that allows markets to connect is that transportation is changing drastically because of the Industrial Revolution. So probably the biggest obstacle to the economy, to the growth of the country was transportation. It's difficult to get across places on land. You don't have paved roads. You also have problems like the Appalachian Mountains. It's difficult to get across mountains. That's maybe the biggest obstacle to the national economy. So if you look at the difference in sea transport versus land transport, you can see that in 1820, it cost $9 to transport 1 ton of goods across the Atlantic Ocean. If you took that same $9, it would only get you 30 miles on land. So 3,000 miles to 30 miles. Big difference. It took 6 weeks to go 500 miles from Connecticut to Ohio. You can drive that in about 7, 8 hours now. So one of the big modes of transportation and of trade on the Mississippi River were what known as flatboats. You can see a picture of this here. It's basically just a big barge that uses the current of the river. You could load stuff on it, trade stuff down the river, but it cruised the river at about 3 to 5 miles an hour. So it's a little bit about as fast as we walk, maybe a little bit faster. And then they sold the boat for wood at the mouth of the Mississippi. So once they floated down and trade all their stuff, you can't take the boat back up. You sell it for wood, and the people on the boat would actually walk back upstream to where they came from. But despite we see that flatboats, water is still the easiest way to transport things. So one of the biggest solutions for transportation were canals. They created a series of canals in the United States. So by 1837, there are 3,000 miles of canals in the United States. These canals connected the Midwest to the Northeast and allowed for goods and people to be shipped back and forth between those areas. One of the most important canals was the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is a 350-mile long canal which connects the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, with the Hudson River. The Hudson River flows into New York City. So that's where, Manhattan Island is one side of the Hudson River. So you're able to connect goods from New York all the way to the Great Lakes. This lowered transportation costs by 90%. So in 1830, $15 million worth of goods were transported on the Erie Canal. By 1850, $200 million in goods were transported. So you see a massive growth in transportation on the canal. And you also see changes in the ability to transport goods on steamboats. So one thing that comes out of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain is the steam engine. It uses coal to burn steam to push a wheel. So it's a mechanized motor. So they use these big paddle boats to push. You can see the stacks there. It has a big paddle, pushes in. Over 200 steamboats moved up and down the Mississippi. This is a way quicker form of transportation. Rather than just using the current of the river or paddling, you're using machines to push you. As a result of all this trade, as a result of the growth of the economy, New York City grows and becomes the largest city in the United States. This is where massive amount of people are immigrating. People are coming to New York City, but they're also coming here for the trade, for the growth of industry. And so you get to where, today, New York City is still the largest city in the United States. So this is where you really see New York City flourish and grow. Solution to travel over land was found in railroads. Again, this was pioneered in Great Britain. The use of track and then a steam engine train to go on the track. And so this quickly grows in the United States as a way to travel over land at faster speeds. So 30,000 miles of track are laid in the early part of the century into 1870, particularly on the East Coast there, you see that. But this sparked the growth of cities along rail lines such as Chicago, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. These become major trade hubs and grow as a result of the railroads. Also, our town of Roanoke is a result of the railroads. You can see there, if you actually locate the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad was completed, went through Bristol in 1856, and Roanoke kind of grew out of that. The Norfolk and Western Railway put its headquarters in Roanoke in 1882, and that's when Roanoke actually really grew. So that's actually a result of our town as a result of the growth of railroads. So a big part of all this growth is the change in technology, the ability to transfer goods easier, to manufacture goods easier, basically mass production. These are things that we see today inside. These have lasting effects. That's why I mean it's one of the biggest changes in human history, the Industrial Revolution. One of the biggest technological change, one of the biggest inventions of the 18th century was invented by Cyrus McCormick when he invented the mechanical reaper. The reaper is a piece of machinery that allowed farmers to harvest wheat way easier. So prior to the reaper, it took 37 hours to harvest 1 acre of wheat by hand. After the reaper, the productivity increased by 15 times. So it's allowing farmers to harvest way more land, way more wheat than they would have by hand. This is a huge innovation. Farming innovation was created by John Deere. We probably know the new name John Deere from tractors, the green tractors we see today. But John Deere actually invented the steel plow you can see here. This allowed, using horsepower, allowed people to plow fields way easier, to plant seeds, other things. So using innovation to improve farming. Important invention for farming was Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. This is a way to pull cotton off the plant. It was very hard to do by hand. And this really improved cotton production. So you can see here just the leap in cotton production is from 1790, 3 million pounds of cotton were produced. By 1815, 93 million pounds of cotton was produced. So this is a huge growth based on innovation, based on technology, based on invention. So you can see here, these are pictures of the cotton trade. The cotton trade becomes a mainstay of the U.S. economy. It becomes very important for the U.S. economy. And a problem with that and stuff we will see going forward is the cotton trade is based on slavery. We talked about that in our last lecture, how slaves are used to produce the cotton. Although they can produce more with the cotton gin, they still need the slaves to work the field. So this is meaning that the South is relying so much on cotton that it will create problems as there become problems with slavery. The cotton that is being produced is actually being shipped up to the north to be refined, to be sewn into clothing. And this is done in a way that Samuel Slater invents in the factory system. So what you see here are the first textile mills. The raw cotton is being turned into fabrics. And so what's happening here is you have a huge building where people are taking that raw cotton and using machines. And basically what's happening is people are, unskilled laborers who would have been subsistence farmers are moving to cities to work machines like this, basically do very repetitive motions where they spend all day running cotton through these machines to produce, clothing, to produce fabrics. So this is a huge step forward. This is a huge step in production. This is meaning that more and more fabric, more stuff being produced because of the factory system. So another huge aspect of the growth of factories and the growth of mechanization, the growth of machines is something Eli Whitney invents, and that is interchangeable parts. So Whitney invents the cotton gin that kind of revolutionizes the cotton industry in the South. But he also invents this idea of interchangeable parts, which revolutionizes the factories in the North. So basically, interchangeable parts are parts that are produced at a massive amount. And Whitney actually started this with the guns. So you could have a part that could be used in several different guns. Moving out, before parts were usually made by hand, remember, by like local artisans. And what happens is this idea has actually become more and more universal. Henry Ford steals this idea about 80 years later in producing Model Ts in the Ford factory. So basically every part fits, every wheel is the same, every piece is the same. So for these guns, everything produced, every chamber is the same, so it can go on every gun. You don't have handmade parts. It allows for more mass production, allows for factories to work at higher volume. And finally, a huge advancement in technology is the advancement in communication. Samuel Morse invents the telegraph. We've probably heard of Morse code before. Basically, it's a code where you could send a message through a system of beeps along like a wire line. And so what happens is you're able to communicate long distances. Morse actually became an inventor due to the death of his wife. He started tinkering around and came up with this idea. And so 20,000 miles of line are laid down 10 years after it was invented. A transatlantic line 20 years after the telegraph was invented. So what this means is that you can have communication for 20,000 miles. You have to think before a message would have taken, you'd have to travel all the way across the Atlantic, put it in a letter form. After the transatlantic line, you can send a message from the Great Britain to the United States in a matter of moments. That is a huge, huge change in human history, a huge change in the ability to communicate and the ability to pass ideas from one another. It's a huge step forward. Obviously, as a result of all of this, there's a massive change of labor, and this is part of the changing economy. Labor in the United States is growing, and it's adapting in different ways. Results of the growth of cotton is also the growth of slavery. So in 1800, you have 900,000 slaves in the United States in the South, mainly working cotton fields. By 1860, that number is 4 million. So it's grown massively as the need for cotton has grown, as the production capabilities of cotton has grown, so has the need for slave labor. So this is growing the economy massively, and it's also building the idea of the American dream. People want to come to the United States. So you get massive amounts of Irish and German immigrants. From 1820 to 1860, 2 million Irish migrated to the United States, in particular between the years of 1845 and 1849 in what's known as the Irish potato famine. Potato crops failed, so they were actually leaving starvation to try to come to the United States, and 1.5 million Germans. So these are a lot of people coming here to find jobs to keep building upon that American dream. Are actually entering the workforce as well. In New England, farm girls who would have traditionally done things on their small farm are being hired to work in those textile mills to produce cotton goods, to produce fabrics. So by 1840, 8,000 women labored in textile mills in the United States. That's 75% of the workforce that was used to those mills. So this is a big change. Really hard work. It required long days. Women worked 73 hours a week from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the mill doing the same thing every day, working the machine. They lived in boarding houses, so they were given housing to work all that much, but they received half the pay of men. So there was still a gender wage gap, even more extreme in these days. Changing economy is also the support of the government. The government wants the economy to grow. You got to think that when the economy is booming, we hear about this all the time today. The economy is booming, taxes are coming in, things are good, people are happy. So the government is supporting this economic growth. The government supports what is known as the American system. They begin to implement tariffs, which are basically a cost of importing goods from foreign countries. So it protects the domestic goods inside. So if you want to bring your good into the United States, say from Great Britain, you have to pay a tariff on that good. So it makes it more expensive to bring that good into the U.S. market. And that the idea behind a tariff is it builds up the local economy. It builds up the manufacturing here. The U.S. government is giving credits and investments. They're investing in manufacturing, investing in this industrialization. And there's local support for internal improvements. Local governments, smaller governments are supporting improvements to infrastructure, other things, improving railways, improving things like this to grow the economy in the American system. The impact of tariffs here. In 1828, foreign manufactured goods were taxed at 50%. So that means that if you're trying to bring something in from, say, Great Britain, it's going to be taxed for 50% of what it's worth. So that's a massive amount. That's to discourage other goods coming into the American market and hopefully grow the American market. In credit growth, this is where we see the growth of the market economy. So in 1791, there are 4 banks in the United States. By 1809, there's $6 million in circulation in these banks. By 1815, so in 6 years, $70 million circulated by 246 banks. And then by 1840, there are 702 banks. So look at the growth of that in 50 years. The amount of banks from 4 banks to 702 banks. So investment is growing. Credit is growing. People are able to have more money. Banks can lend money to grow investment. So this is just a sign of how the economy is changing massively to that market economy. An example of a huge company that grows out of this, a huge corporation, the Boston Manufacturing Company, the textile mills. This is a corporation that hired thousands of workers. Thousands of people now work for this. So think about going from subsistence farming, you own your small farm, to being a company, to working at a place where you're one of thousands working there. They manufacture cloth in factories. So this is a huge operation, making tons of money. So it's just a huge change in how goods are produced, how people live, and how basically the whole economy works. So the growth of manufacturing occurs in what we refer to, what you see here, as factories. The factory system grows manufacturing. So this really begins in the town of Lowell, which is outside of Boston. And that's what you're seeing a picture of here. The Lowell system is this system of factories. So in 1860, you have 122,000 workers working in these factories. They produced 1 million bales of cotton a year, and they worked over 5 million spindles. So this is a huge, huge growth, a huge factory. Think about going from the subsistence farming, what life was like then, to working in a factory like this, living on top of each other. So this shows us the market economy, the growth of technology, all of these things have combined to change life in the United States, particularly in the Northeast along the coast. But it's going to have lasting effects on our history. And like I said, this is one of the biggest changes in human history. This changes everything about our lifestyle. And we will continue to see the effects. We continue to see these effects today.